Hi, I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about biblical worldview, and specifically I wanted to talk about how and why the world was created. Obviously, there are only two causes for the existence of the world and the universe that we see. Either we were created or we just happened. If you're going to have a biblical worldview, that's one of the things that you're going to have to deal with. And the whole idea that the world just happens comes from the idea of evolution. And so there's this conflict between creation and evolution. Obviously, the Bible teaches creation. It says in Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And it goes on and says, the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And then God said, let there be light. And there was light, and God saw the light, and that it was good. When I first became a Christian, I was somebody that was interested in science, and so I had a struggle because I pick up my Bible and I go through and I read the book of Genesis, and in this passage it talks about the creation of the world. And first off, it starts off with a cold creation. You run into this whole thing with 6 days of creation, that kind of thing. And it's one of the things that I had a hard time with, because it talks about in the passage evening and the morning and the first day and the second day and so on and so forth. And so I'm like, well, the Bible's teaching that the world was created in 6 days. And what I was trying to do was take God and evolution and put it all together and say that, well, maybe God used evolution. So one of the things that I did was I went through this passage and I decided, well, maybe the days are long periods of time, but like I said, the first day has a cold creation. You have water on the earth and you have land rising up out of the water. Well, that's backwards. That is not how things took place, according to evolution, the evolution of the solar system. And then after the land rises up out of the water, you have the atmosphere created. And so you have water without an atmosphere. Well, that's not going to work because the water is going to boil up. It's going to sublimate. After that, you have the creation of vegetation with no life in the sea. And then after that, you have the creation of the sun and the moon and the stars. And the point that I'm making is everything's out of order. When you get to the creation of life in the sea, at the same time you have life in the sea created, you have birds created. Well, that's out of order too, because the way that it goes is single-celled life forms to multi-celled life forms, to make it simple, fish to amphibians to reptiles, and then you get to birds. So you can't have birds and sea life created at the same time. The only thing that's in order is the 6th day, when land animals are created, and then after that man's created. So putting that whole thing together with evolution was just a real problem. And again, I was one of those guys that said, I believe in science. And I had a hard time taking naturalistic science and putting it together. Well, I started looking into these things and I found out that there's good reasons to understand that we actually have a creator and a creation here. When you look at small things, for example, when you're talking about the cell, one of the reasons evolution got a foothold is because they used to think that the cell was simple. You talk about simple one-celled organisms. That's nonsense. Cells exhibit a structure it's just radical. They're like little cities. And so when you look at a cell, it has a city wall, that's the membrane. It has a transport system, that's the cytoskeleton. It has a recycling plant, that's a lysosome. It has a power station, mitochondria. It has a library, that's the nucleus. It has little factories called ribosomes. It has an industrial park, and that's the endoplasmic reticulum. It's radically complex. It's nothing like what we thought. Even DNA, radically complex. It's a code. It's a digital code. And so there are these chemicals that act like letters, and there's literally words in DNA. I'm talking about literally words in DNA. There are start codons and stop codons. What that means is each word is separated and it makes a little language. When messenger RNA is created, it translates the language from the DNA to the RNA. It substitutes code and makes a different language and then passes that on. And that's how you get proteins and other things made. Talk about small things as far as life, it's radically complex. When you talk about the universe, it looks like it's been designed for us. It's called the anthropic principle. And so when you're talking about atoms, for example, atoms are held together, the nucleus of atoms are held together by this strong nuclear force. If it was 2% one way or the other, we wouldn't have life in the universe. If it was 2% more weak, you wouldn't have multi-proton nuclei. That means you wouldn't have heavy elements, you wouldn't have metals and things like that. If it was a little bit stronger, you wouldn't have hydrogen. And if you don't have hydrogen, you don't have water, and you can't have life. The stability of the proton, it's stable enough to keep there from being too much radiation. We need radiation, but too much kills everything. When you talk about the distance between stars, if we were closer to other stars, it would destabilize orbits in our solar system. And so basically you have a perfect structure. We have a perfect distance from the center of the universe. We have a perfect distance from other stars. We have a perfect sun. More distant from the sun, too cold, closer, too hot. If the sun was more luminous, too hot, less luminous, too cold. If it was more blue, you wouldn't have photosynthesis. If it was more red, again, you would have a situation where it would be too cold. We have the perfect gravity, we have the perfect crust, we have the perfect rotation, we have the perfect tilt, we have the perfect shininess of the planet. It's called albedo. And a little bit less or more, it would cause everything to be messed up. And we have the perfect atmosphere. And so it looks like everything in the universe has been designed for us. And so I think that God created the world. I think he created the universe. I don't know all the hows on that, but he does describe that, and God is actively involved in that whole thing. So the universe was created by God, and there's a why to this too, and that's what I want to end this with. There's a passage in the book of Revelation that talks about the fact that God has a reason for the creation of the universe, and actually it's a pretty cool one. And it's in Revelation chapter 4. And in my translation it says, "You are worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they exist and were created." That's a good translation. Here's another one. "You are worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and for your pleasure they were created." We were created for God's pleasure. And one of the things that is cool about that, and the major implication of that, is if I'm created for God's pleasure, then I am only fulfilling my destiny if I'm pleasing Him. If I'm not pleasing Him, then I'm out of my design parameters. Like anything else that has been designed, if you take it outside of its parameters, what you're going to do is break it. A lot of people are broken because they're outside of their design parameters. When God says, "I want you to do those things that are pleasing to me," He's designed me to be a certain type of person. He's designed me to have certain types of relationships. He's designed me to live in a certain type of way. And when I go outside the design, I break myself. When I'm inside the design, everything's awesome. And I have a relationship with God where I'm in love with Him and where He's in love with me. And He can show me His love and His approval because I'm in the parameters. So that's why we're here. That's how we got here. And that's a cool thing. God bless you.